Good morning, hearty fourth grade. Miss Prince here. This week, your ELA passage is called The Meadowlands. So right now, I want you to open your packet that you've picked up from the school and open it to the passage titled The Meadowlands. After that, we're going to read through this together and review how to chunk text, how to organize it into paragraphs to read, and how to underline or highlight important details as you're reading. Those are very important reading comprehension strategies we're going to be practicing today. All right, now that you've gotten your Meadowlands passage out, I want you to find the first sentence and follow along with your finger as we read this passage together.
The Meadowlands by Reedworks. When they described the swamp at the end of Schuyler Avenue, the adults in Sarah's life seemed confused. Whenever she asked about it, Sarah's dad would chuckle. "You'd better stay away from the Meadowlands," her father said. Sarah's sixth grade teacher, Mr. Morrison, said only parts of the Meadowlands are swamps. He explained to the class that the Meadowlands are precious wetlands, one of the last places near New York City where birds migrating from Florida could stop and rest.
All right, I'm going to pause it there. Now, let's go back and look. We read paragraphs 1, 2, and 3. I'm going to look for important details that we need to remember. Now, something that stuck out to me was that Mr. Morrison, the teacher, said only parts of the Meadowlands are swamps. So I'm going to highlight that so we can find it later. Then it says he explained to the class that the Meadowlands are precious wetlands. Now, that's an unfamiliar word. So I'm going to highlight that in blue. We may have to look that up if you don't know what wetlands means. One of the last places near New York City where birds migrating from Florida could stop and rest. Migrating is another unfamiliar word. So I'm going to highlight that in blue. Now we've stopped here at paragraph 3, so we're going to start on paragraph 4.
The Meadowlands once had a lot of garbage dumps, which polluted the water pretty badly, Mr. Morrison said. But most of the dumps are closed now, and the habitat for wild birds is recovering. From her yard in the winter, the Meadowlands was as her dad described. Brown, dead-looking weeds with Doritos bags lying at the water's edge. By springtime, however, the reeds turned green, and flowers grew along the shoreline.
All right, I'm going to stop it there again. We just got some important information, so I think it's important to stop here and sum up what we've just read or heard about. So, from her yard in the winter, the Meadowlands was as her dad described, brown, dead-looking weeds with Dorito bags lying at the water's edge. But by springtime, the reeds turned green and flowers grew along the shoreline. So I'm going to look for important information here. In the winter, it's brown and dead looking. But then in the spring, I'm gonna make springtime green. The reeds turned green and flowers grew along the shoreline. So we have learned the difference in the seasons so far about the Meadowlands, how the Meadowlands look in the winter as opposed to how they look in the springtime.
Sarah wondered. Is the Meadowlands a big, ugly, dangerous swamp? Or is it a beautiful oasis of birds and flowers? Despite her dad's warnings to stay away, Sarah wanted to see for herself. She went under the porch and dragged out her dad's old fiberglass canoe. She threw the paddle and an old pink life jacket into the boat and dragged it across the yard, down Schuyler Avenue to the edge of the swamp. Whatever it was, she saw now.
I'm going to stop again because we were just introduced to our big question. Sarah, so which one is it? Sarah wondered. Is the Meadowlands a big, ugly, dangerous swamp, or is it a beautiful oasis of birds and flowers? I'm gonna make our big question purple and even put out beside it. Big question.
The Meadowlands was big. Sarah always thought of it as the swamp at the end of her street. Now she realized that the wetlands actually stretched to the north and south, and she couldn't see either end. Directly across the water, the skyscrapers of Manhattan seemed to line the opposite shore, even though they were actually 12 miles away. Sarah could feel the fear in her throat. But she didn't want to drag the canoe back up the hill. She zipped the life vest up to her neck, pushed the boat into the water, and jumped in. Past the reeds.
Gonna pause it again. We just read paragraphs 7 and 8. Now, Sarah is wondering about the Meadowlands, if they're a dead swamp or if they're a beautiful oasis of birds and flowers. Which one are they? So what is Sarah doing to find this out? Directly across the water, the skyscrapers of Manhattan seemed to line the opposite shore, even though they were actually 12 miles away. Sarah could feel the fear in her throat, but she didn't want to drag the canoe back up the hill. She zipped up the life vest to her neck, pushed the boat into the water, and jumped in. What is Sarah doing here? What are important details that we need to remember? I think we need to remember she couldn't see either end of the wetlands. And she knew the skyscrapers were actually 12 miles away, even though she could see them. She could feel the fear in her throat. And she zipped the life vest. She's putting on a life vest up to her neck, pushed the boat into the water, and jumped in. What is Sarah doing here?
She found herself paddling in a shallow pond surrounded by muddy islands. She saw ducks, swallows, yellow flowers, purple flowers, white egrets. A blue heron, disturbed by the splashes of Sarah's paddle, jumped into the air, uncurled its long wings, and flapped away. This is all so beautiful, Sarah thought. The canoe slowed down, as if caught by invisible hands. Sarah looked down and saw the boat was scraping along the muddy bottom. Clouds of brown mud rose to the surface with every paddle stroke, and inside each cloud little bubbles of gas burst when they hit the surface. It smelled like a combination of old paint and rotting food. Sarah nearly threw up.
All right, we're going to pause there again because remember, we're chunking our text. We're only looking at a few paragraphs at a time so we can make sure we get all the important details underlined. So Sarah is now paddling in a shallow pond surrounded by muddy islands. This tells you what the meadowlands, what the wetlands look like. She saw ducks, swallows, yellow flowers, purple flowers, white egrets, a blue heron. I've seen a blue heron before in Chattanooga. They are beautiful. I'm going to highlight all of these in green because all of these words, all of these features are in support of the Meadowlands being like a spring oasis. Beautiful birds and flowers are things you would expect to see in the springtime. Sarah says this is all so beautiful. The canoe slowed down as if caught by invisible hands. What's slowing her down? There's mud. And there are little bubbles of gas bursting at the top of the pond when they hit the surface. It smelled like a combination of old paint and rotting food. Ugh. So that's maybe in support of it being a wasteland, like she originally thought.
Soon, she was stuck. She tried paddling backward to free the canoe from the mud, but each stroke released an overwhelming gas smell. She started to cry. Just then, something heavy and dark crashed through the weeds in front of the canoe. A hand pulled the reeds apart, and out poked the head of Sarah's dad. "Sarah, what are you doing out here?" he called. Sarah tried to explain, but all she could do was cry. "Well, it's a good thing you dragged the canoe. You left a trail in the gravel a mile wide," her dad said. "Here, take this rope." He threw a yellow plastic rope, and after a few tries, Sarah grabbed it. Her dad pulled, and the boat skidded over the mud to shore.
All right, what's just happened here? We just had a big event. So Sarah's out exploring in the Meadowlands, just like her dad told her not to do. And then what happened? She found beautiful birds and flowers first, and then she found mud and gas in the water that smelled like rotting food and made her want to throw up. And then soon, her canoe was stuck in this mud. She tried paddling backwards, but what happened? It smelled even worse. There was an overwhelming gas smell, and she started to cry. But then someone came to help Sarah, which was her dad. Very good. So he followed the trail. She left a trail in the gravel and the mud. And then he rescued her from where her canoe was stuck.
Sarah worried that her father would be furious, but when he offered his hand to help her out of the boat, he laughed. "I did the same foolish thing when I was your age," he said. "Did I ever show you the otter den?" Sarah wiped tears from her cheek and shook her head no. "Well, come on, I'll show you," her dad said. "The swamps can be pretty disgusting, but there's some beautiful stuff in here. You just have to know where to look."
All right, that is the end of this passage. So now let's look at this last little section that we just read. Sarah's just been rescued by her dad, and she was worried he would be furious or angry because she disobeyed him. She did exactly what he said not to do. But he laughed and told her he did the same thing when he was a little kid. He did the exact same thing Sarah did. He wanted to explore the swamp, and so he went out. And he answered her question. He said, "These swamps can be pretty disgusting. The mud, the gassy smell, the ickiness of it, the canoe getting stuck. But there's some beautiful stuff in here if you know where to look, if you've studied the swamps and the meadowlands, if you're familiar with them, maybe if you're a scientist in that region, or a botanist studying the plant life, or a biologist studying the animal life in the swamp. So let's highlight that in purple as the answer to our big question. And then out beside it, I'm going to write big question answered, so I know where to find it. Now, let's go and look at our comprehension questions for this passage and see if we need to reread any of it. So first, I'm just going to read aloud these questions, then I will do the first 2 with you. I want you to do the rest on your own. You have 10 total questions. The adults in Sarah's life seem confused about what? A, New York City. B, garbage dumps. C, birds and wildlife. D, the Meadowlands. Sarah takes her dad's canoe to explore the Meadowlands. What motivates Sarah's actions? She wants to know if the Meadowlands are an ugly swamp or a beautiful oasis. She wants to prove that her dad is wrong about the danger of the Meadowlands. She wants to study the Meadowlands to complete a class project. She wants to show her dad that she is brave and adventurous by exploring on her own. Those are the 2 questions I'm going to do with you. So we've just read them. Now let's go back and look back at the passage. At the beginning of the passage is when Sarah's talking about all the adults in her life. In fact, the exact wording of our question 1, the adults in Sarah's life seem confused about what is in this passage. Let's reread paragraph 1. When they described the swamp at the end of Schuler Avenue, the adults in Sarah's life seemed confused. There's our word. I'm going to highlight it in blue. Whenever she asked about it, Sarah's dad would chuckle. "You'd better stay away from the Meadowlands," her father said. Sarah's 6th grade teacher, Mr. Morrison, said only parts of the Meadowlands are swamps. He explained to the class that the Meadowlands are precious wetlands, one of the last places near New York City where birds migrating from Florida could stop and rest. The Meadowlands once had a lot of garbage dumps, which polluted the water pretty badly, Mr. Morrison said, but most of the dumps are closed now, and the habitat for wild birds is recovering. Now let's look back at our answer choices. The adults in Sarah's life seem confused about what? New York City, garbage dumps, birds and wildlife, the Meadowlands. All of these things are mentioned, but what is the main idea of that chunk of text we just reread? Are they all confused about New York? Is this whole passage talking about New York City? No. Are they confused about garbage dumps? Is this whole passage talking about garbage dumps and what they are? No. Are they confused about birds and wildlife? Not quite. So, Meadowlands, that's our last choice. They're confused about the Meadowlands and if they're a beautiful place or if they're an ugly swamp, which leads to Sarah's big question. Sarah takes her dad's canoe to explore the Meadowlands. What motivates Sarah's actions? She wants to know if the Meadowlands are an ugly swamp or a beautiful oasis. She wants to prove that her dad is wrong about the danger of the Meadowlands. She wants to study the Meadowlands to complete a class project. Or she wants to show her dad that she is brave and adventurous by exploring on her own. Now think back to our big question. That answers this question. Sarah takes her dad's canoe to explore the Meadowlands. That's what she does in this passage. What motivates Sarah's actions, or why does Sarah do this? Scroll down. Here's our big questions. So which one is it? Sarah wondered. Is the Meadowland a big, ugly, dangerous swamp? Or is it a beautiful oasis of birds and flowers? Despite her dad's warnings to stay away, Sarah wanted to see for herself. Sarah wants to know if the Meadowlands are an ugly swamp or a beautiful oasis. Ding, ding, ding. That is our big question right there, option A. Now, we should look at the other options just to make sure there's not a better choice, but we can be pretty positive that we're correct on this one. She wants to prove that her dad is wrong. Maybe, but that's not her primary focus. She wants to study the Meadowlands to complete a class project. Maybe eventually, but it doesn't tell us anything about that, so we have to mark that choice out. She wants to show her dad that she is brave and adventurous by exploring on her own. Maybe she wants to do that too, but the passage didn't say anything about that. The passage said specifically she wanted to know if the Meadowlands were an ugly swamp or if they were a beautiful oasis. So we can take those words directly from the text and find them in our answer choices. Now, I want you to answer questions 3 through 10 on your own. Question 3, there are different opinions about the Meadowlands. What evidence from the story best supports this statement? Question 4, based on the story, what can you conclude about the Meadowlands? What can you deduce? What conclusion can you come to? Question 5, what is the story mostly about? Question 6, read the following sentences. Well, the Meadowlands once had a lot of garbage dumps that polluted the water pretty badly, but most of the dumps are closed now, and the habitat for wild birds is recovering. As used in this sentence, what does the word recovering most nearly mean? What is your best choice? Question 7. Choose the answer that best completes the sentence below. Sarah wants to see what the Meadowlands are like. Blank. She takes her dad's canoe and paddles into the swamp. If I were doing this question, I would fill in each word and see which one fits best and makes the most sense. Fill in each answer choice and see which one makes the most sense in that blank. Question 8. According to Mr. Morrison, why are the Meadowlands precious? This is where you have to type in full sentences or write in full sentences with capital letters and punctuation what you think. What does the text say that Mr. Morrison says makes the Meadowlands precious? Look for that word in the text. Look for where it talks about Mr. Morrison, her teacher. Question 9. Why does Sarah start to cry in the Meadowlands? Again, this is short answer. Write in sentences with capital letters and punctuation. Look back in the text. When does Sarah start to cry? Why did that happen? Write it in a sentence. And then question 10. In the story, there are 2 different views of the Meadowlands. 1, the Meadowlands are a dangerous and ugly swamp. And 2, the Meadowlands are a beautiful and precious oasis. Which of these views, if any, accurately describe the Meadowlands? Support your answer using information from the story. So here you have to give your opinion. Think about everything Sarah described, everything she saw, everything her teacher described, her dad described, and form an opinion. Do you think the Meadowlands are 1, an ugly swamp, or 2, a beautiful oasis? Then write your opinion using full sentences. I think the Meadowlands are blank, your opinion. Then you have to say why. I think this because, and give evidence from the text. What details from the text helped you to form that opinion? Now, if you have any other questions, please comment below. Please reach out to me or your teacher. I would love to hear from you. This is Miss Prince again, friends. I love you all. I miss you so, so much. And we are so close to seeing each other at end of school checkout from the car. I cannot wait to see all of you. Bye, friends.